if you're married or if you're in a relationship, ask questions, use words, and just try to communicate that I really do want to understand you.
Larry, welcome to the Modern Masculinity Pod. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity here.
I ask all of our guests to sort of take us into their world and share some of the challenges, the onus, the load that they're bearing, because a lot of podcasts, they talk about all of the accolades and all the achievements, and of course those are great. But I find that one of the quickest ways to relate to somebody is sort of through misery. But what are you still dealing with as a man, as a husband, as a provider, a business owner? You wear all these sort of hats. What sort of things do you still find yourself working?
First of all, I love that question because you're right. I mean, that's reality, right? And the other day I was listening to a podcast and I was kind of relating to the content of what the host was talking about. And then she said something about the struggle of getting from a seven-figure business to an eight-figure business. And I just went, okay, you're in a different stratosphere of where I'm at. And I was thinking, what about the people who are going from a three-figure business to a four-figure and five and six and then beyond? But so my backstory is that my wife and I, we've been married for 36 years. So I'm old. I've gone through an awful lot. We've been entrepreneurs for 21 years. The last almost 13 years have been full time with that, but we are kind of starting over again now. We've been in the e-commerce space. We did scale that to high six figures and enjoyed that for a season. And then things changed the last 2 or 3 years with the economy and, blah, 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 all of that. And so we now feel a calling to go into coaching other couples. We've done a lot of e-commerce coaching, my wife and I have, but now we are coaching married couples primarily and married entrepreneurs primarily. But we're kind of expanding beyond that a little bit because I do have a strong desire to help men who are younger than me to come along and to understand how to just live life and to do it in a way where you'll end up without regrets. We're all going to have some regrets, but I'm saying to minimize those regrets.
Yeah, I wonder if in generations past, that sort of mentor relationship it was more. I don't know if available is the right word, but it seems like they're like so many of my friends that I have my age, they don't have that older guy that's been around the block a couple of times that they can come and talk to about life and and share. And I've been fortunate to have a number of those men in my life, but it was intentional. It wasn't on accident, and it was because I realized that I did not have that. And I love my dad. He did his best and he did the best that he could knowing what he did. And also there was not much advice that he gave to me. We never had a talk about what am I going to do with my life? After he realized that I wasn't really going to make it in sports, it was like, all right, well, you're sort of on your own. That was his path that he had for me, and that didn't pan out. And I wonder if there was some lingering trauma there or whatever. And of course, his relationship with his dad was really challenging. And so for me, I realized that there was a need for that masculine
Yeah.
leadership. And it makes me wonder, it makes me think that a lot of guys, in their 20s and their 30s, probably don't have that wise man that they can reach out to and be vulnerable with and talk to or whatever about whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in the past, in the recent past, even was a structure set up to where just people were more involved in other people's lives. And I mean that in a good way. We think of that today as being people being nosy. It used to be a day where you could just show up at somebody's house and knock on the door and go in. And now if that happened, people would be calling 911 and everything. So things have changed a lot in our society, and some of it's for the better and some of it's not. But I'm a Christian, and so I go back to biblical truths, and that's just kind of who I am. It's how I live, and whenever you look back to that ancient biblical wisdom, there's just a lot of instruction that the older generation is to be building into the younger generation's lives, and that the younger generation is to listen and pay attention and respect their elders. And just unfortunately, that has broken down over the generations. There's always been, I'm sure that there's always been that whole thing about, my dad doesn't know as much as what he thinks he does. And then you start turning 25 and 30 and your dad starts getting really, really smart, right? And I kind of had the same. I've got a great relationship with my dad. He's 90 years old and he still is doing fantastic. And I still call him for advice and such. But I had kind of a similar type of experience that you did, in that he taught me a certain number of things. And at some point, he just thought, that's all I got as far as career options and things like that, and advice in that regard. And so I did reach out to other older men in my church just to spend some time and to kind of soak in some of that wisdom. How do you navigate this area of life? Because, when you're getting married, most time, whenever you're getting married, you go through premarital counseling, and then you get married and everybody just says, good luck. There's no postmarital counseling unless you seek it out and you start paying a lot of money for that. When you have kids, there's no instruction booklet that comes with it. In my stage of life now, where I'm just about to the empty nesting stage, it's like, what is going on right now? Everything is upside down for me. And I'm still seeking out older men and just saying, how did you navigate that? How do I handle this situation? It's like everything is brand new with my wife now. So every stage of life has challenges and struggles. And there are people who have gone beyond us and have navigated that. And so we need to glean the wisdom from them. And then we need to pay that forward, so to speak, and then be looking out for people who are a step or two behind us and help bring them along to where we are.
Yeah, I remember there was this first experience, and it was probably about fifth, sixth grade, where my mom was like, I don't know how to help you with your homework anymore. Like what you said, you're sort of beyond, this is all I got. And so it made me, at that point, I was like, all right, I've got to figure this out on my own, which was sort of to my detriment, because she probably should have said, let me connect you with somebody who does know, who can help. And I remember in my teens and 20s thinking, like, these old fuddy duddies don't know what it's like. They don't know. They don't know. And also, I think there is a little bit of truth to that, because if we think about, the difference in lifestyle, or what life was like for me versus my grandpa, and we go great grandpa, we go one more generation. I mean, the difference between the 1900s and the 2000s are totally different worlds in terms of technology and the sociological sort of move, like everything that's sort of happening. And as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that it's also the exact same too. Relationships, haven't, marriage is still marriage, parenting is still parenting. And so, although on the outside things look and appear to be different, I think that they're not actually that different. There's so much wisdom that can be taken from those previous generations. And I was sort of avoiding it, or I was sort of blind to it, because I was going, they don't know how to use a cell phone. They don't know how to use they don't know how to type on a keyboard. They don't know how to, they don't know the internet. And that was such to my detriment as I was, becoming a man, starting a business, going through my marriage and relationship and that sort of whole thing, and becoming a parent, because I wish that I would have sought that help earlier.
Yes, if somehow we could figure out how to infuse that into like the teenage brain, so that, as I'm just thinking about myself as well, as if as a teenager and a young, say 20 and even into the 30s, if I would have just been paying much more attention to what are other people doing that is making them successful. One of the exercises that we do with clients is we say, just start thinking about some people that you really admire. And they could be famous people, or it could be somebody that nobody's ever heard of, but you see them around town or at church or whatever, and you admire that person or that couple. You have great respect for them, and then the next step is to say, what is it about that person that I respect? What draws me to that person? Is it their consistency? Is it their faithfulness? Is it their quick decision makers? They have a confidence about them. And then the third step then is to say, what do I need to do to become like that? What do I need to do to become that type of person that other people would look to me with respect? And so that is just a tough thing to have a young person understand. And to some extent, we do have to experience things. We have to go through our own failures. We have to make our own mistakes and such. But just to your point about everything changes, but everything stays the same, I really believe that as true. Yes, the technology is different, and social media has added just this enormous level to what young people have to deal with today. I really feel for my kids who are younger and they feel this pressure of always looking their best. And that's why, going back to the first question that you asked, what are you struggling with? I just think that's such an important question that we need to ask one another, and then we need to sometimes just be able to share that and to put it out there, make yourself a little bit more vulnerable, be transparent. Is it's just tough, especially for us as men, to do that. Ladies kind of have a natural inclination to do those type of things and to be more open. So I think just being willing to have those conversations, to ask those tough questions of one another, and to have that accountability is very, very helpful. And then you just take those old, as I said, those ancient principles, and you apply them to the modern technology, the modern world, and it plays out very, very well.
Yeah, it seems like that it's sort of becoming a meme, in the sense of there's the guy who on the outside looks like he has it all together
Yeah.
and on the inside is absolutely broken and crumbling. And we seem as men to sort of force ourselves into that where we've got to put on the mask. We've got to, we've got to have the shield up because I do think that it is important for our family and for our kids and for the people that we, are responsible and provide for to see that strength. I think that, if your dad is always out of control, if your dad is unstable, if your dad doesn't have it together, I think that is destabilizing. And also, I don't think that we should have to fake it all the time, right? Or there at least should be a place where we can come down, put the shield down, take off the mask, and be real. And I think that, especially as I've sort of gone on this journey, and I think we're now 100 and almost 150 episodes in, it's like the place for that is with another man. Someone told me that other men are the only ones that can hold space for what men have. And if I made the mistake of dumping all that stuff on my ex, or taking it out on my kids and thinking that like I was being vulnerable, I'm sharing my emotions, and yes I was, but I was not doing it in a productive or a healthy way. I was essentially just dumping all of my trauma, all of my emotions onto them and hoping and expecting that they can deal with it. When I'm like, man, as I sort of reflect on it, I'm like, that is a lot to bear. That is a heavy load to bear. And that's why having other older men who can carry that load or know what that sort of load is like is important to have around.
There's a balancing act in here somewhere, because it is definitely a good thing to be open and vulnerable with your spouse and with your children as well, to help them to see the struggles and such. But there's definitely a line that you don't want to cross, to where your kids are now bearing this weight that they really have no influence in. They have no way of fixing it. If it's a financial issue or some other sort of a struggle, the kid's just like, what am I supposed to do to help out here? Here's my 47 cents I had in my piggy bank. So to allow them to see how you work through things is more important than for them to see exactly what it is that you're struggling with. So yes, I think that a husband and wife need to communicate about challenges. One of our big things that we talk about with this, we have our business is called Side by Side Business. And so we talk about a husband and wife being side by side, attacking problems and challenges together, as opposed to face, where they're arguing about these problems and challenges. And so there's definitely a place for all of that. But I do think the missing piece that just the large majority of men have is other men that they can go to. It could be a group setting. It's much more effective, I think, on a one on one. So it doesn't take like a large crowd to do this. This can be something where literally you, as a younger man, if you see one older gentleman that you really respect, you see that he's living a life that you would like to be living in 20, 30 years, whatever, that would be a great opportunity to approach somebody and just say, hey, can we just grab coffee? You don't have to be too weird about it and say, I want to share my deepest intimate feelings and thoughts with you and such. But because that will come over time, but it's just a relationship that can be formed. And as an older man now myself, if a younger guy came to me and said that, that would be a huge honor to me. And I would be happy to jump on that and to do that. And again, even at my age, I'm looking for older men. There's kind of a sliding scale. And I guess, my dad's now 90, so it's harder for him to find older guys really. But he was telling me just not long ago, he said, I really miss being able to call my dad. and to be able to get that advice and counsel and such. So he has peers, but it's a little bit harder for him to find older men right now. But basically, throughout your lifetime, there's going to be the time where you need people who are around your same age, who are just friends, people who are maybe not overly impressed with you. If you kind of understand what I'm saying, they're willing to see those flaws and to be direct and to help you with that. And so you need that peer, somebody who's probably close to your same age. You need that mentor that you can take that advice from and have him build it into your life. And then you need to be looking for somebody who's younger than you that you can be building into as well. So you've got those three steps, three stages of friends and mentors and people that you form a relationship with. It could be, like I said, it can be three guys, or it could be a lot bigger of a crowd if it does become like a group type of a setting.
Yeah, I've heard, that being one of the major benefits of martial arts is that sort of everybody's at
Mm,
a different stage. And, when you're starting out, whether you are, you're well experienced or you're even an expert, there's oftentimes someone ahead of you. There's someone right at your level and someone that's more of a beginner stage. And that the three of those in tandem
mm,
really allow someone to grow at a consistent rate, at an accelerated rate. Because I think when you don't have one of those, you can get stuck at a plateau thinking that you're all high and mighty and,
yeah.
or that you don't have anything to offer or, forgetting that for me, I fall into sort of the curse of knowledge quite often, which is, I forget what it was like to be new or I forget what it was like. I just assume that everybody has the knowledge and experience that I have and that sort of common sense when, oftentimes it's the furthest from it. I'm curious for you, we talked about this, how everything stays the same and things sort of change. Everything's changes and everything stays the same. I think is the way you put it greatly. When you look at relationships and the people that you're working with, what are sort of the common themes or issues or challenges? What sort of things are you seeing in all the people that you're working with?
Miscommunication in relationships is just, we all deal with it at some level. And if you get into the science of it, which I really don't want to, but you can research this, you can just see that the male brain thinks very, very differently, processes information very differently than the female brain. And so whenever you get into this relationship, I don't want to say you're at a disadvantage to start with, but you've got this complication that just naturally comes into the relationship. And so that's another reason, by the way, where it's really important for you to be communicating with other men because you have that in common. You kind of understand each other at that fundamental level. And in the Bible, it talks about that a husband is to live with his wife in an understanding way. And that seems like God is playing a joke on us, guys. It's like God is saying, I'm going to make you two completely different in the way that you think and process and handle things and emotionally and physically and all these things. And then I'm going to tell you, guys in particular, you need to understand her. And so it's not something that happens easily. It's not something that happens overnight. It's actually a lifelong pursuit. But we see this in almost every couple that we work with is the husband will say, I said such and such, and she flew off the handle. And then we'll get her perspective. And she said, he said, and her understanding of what he was trying to communicate was totally different than what was coming out of his mouth. We work with them at a foundational level to start understanding their perspective and where they're coming from. And then you add to that, so you've got that fundamental how he thinks, how she thinks, and then you add to that the different personality types. You add to that the different experiences and backgrounds and maybe trauma that they've experienced in the past. And then you add other factors like love languages that is really common for people to study that. But so many times we see couples, they just take one thing, like, this is my love language, and I want my spouse to speak this. It's like, okay, that's fine. We can start there. But there's so many layers to all this. And so that all leads to that overall problem that we see of a communication challenge. Whenever a couple is not communicating well, then it affects the connection that they have. When you're not connecting as a couple, then it's really difficult to do just about anything else. And we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So if they're not connecting in their home, then for them to build a business can be a real challenge. Or many times what guys end up doing is they just say, okay, I'm going all into my business, on my career, and my home life is just going to suffer. And so we just work with couples to help them to balance all of that out, be successful in the job, absolutely, but be successful at home as well.
Yeah, I recently pulled out of my closet a book that I wish I would have read more, and maybe my marriage would have ended up in a different way. But it's called The Relationship Cure by John Gottman and Dr. John. And he talks about one of the big themes of that is this, they talk about bids for attention and bids for whatever. But it's these small little notice me things. Like it's just, hey, I want your attention, I want your love, I want your whatever. But it's not a direct, and it usually is, at least from the book, seems like women usually are less direct about those things because of everything
Mhm.
that you talked about. And there's sort of an understanding that we should interpret these things as such. And the challenge is if we're not looking for them, we don't recognize those things. We don't recognize the, hey, do you want to go, do this, or hey, do you want to, these small little subtle things is actually an opportunity to create that connection. And there's a sort of this classic, meme or thing that goes around of like, why won't she just tell me what she wants, right? Like, why can't she just say that? And it's a big frustration that guys have that is, I think, pretty common, but sort of points to what you're speaking about, and just that we are wired differently because it
Yeah.
seems like she does think she's telling you what she wants. You're just not listening, or perhaps we're not looking in the right way. We're not interpreting it in the right way. We're not seeing, we don't have the
Mhm.
lens on that shows us, oh, this is actually, she's saying this, but what she's actually meaning or saying or doing is this. And I think that could be a hard chasm to cross for a lot of guys.
Absolutely. And this is not easy. That is for sure. And this is again where an older man can really help the younger guys to say, like, okay, again, I'm not wanting to say that all women are exactly the same in no way, shape, or form, but there are definitely some similarities. And so an older guy who's been married for 36 years like me could talk to a younger guy and say, like, it's likely that she means this when she says that. But the number one key that we talk with couples, and I in particular will talk to guys about, is just say, ask her. Use your words and ask her. Now, sometimes, again, like you said, there's the whole thing about the woman is just like, I want him to figure this out on his own. And in some ways, that's just unfair. And so, at some level, as a man, I would go to my wife and just say, look, I really want to demonstrate the love that I have for you in a way that you receive that. So, can you just help me out here a little bit? Can you share with me when you say this, what is it that you actually mean? Can you connect these dots? One of the things, as I referenced how a man's brain works versus a woman's brain, we like to use the analogy of a house. And so a man's brain has all these different rooms. And when he's in each of these different rooms, there's a huge soundproof door that he closes behind him. So when he's working, he is in that space and he can just filter out everything else. And if something's happened in the next room, he doesn't know about it, he doesn't care about it. And then whenever work is done, and again, sometimes this isn't a perfect analogy, but in general, this is how things work. And then when he leaves that room, then he goes to the next room, and that room may be the fun room. We're gonna go on a date night. We're gonna whatever. Could be another room that's a sports room. Could be actually men have a room that is a nothing room where you can actually kind of turn your brain off, and that is most guys. That's the favorite room because there's no stress in there, and unfortunately, things do have a tendency to bleed into there. But in a lady's, like in the landscape of her house, everything is connected. It's like an open floor plan. And my wife kind of explains it like if she is in one room, maybe she's watching a movie and having fun, but the kids are in a different room and they're arguing. And I'm just like oblivious to it. I didn't even hear it. And she's just like, I can't concentrate on the movie. It's no fun because something's going on with the kids. I need to go take care of them. And even if she said she can hear the dishes calling out to her, like the dishes that are sitting in the sink that need to get done. And I'm like, come on, we'll get to that later. And so there's this complete disconnect that can happen. I'll just tell a quick story here. The other day, we had gotten home from church. It was kind of late. It was probably 8 o'clock at night. We had not eaten supper yet. And kind of a staple in our home is baked potatoes. And so just said to my wife, "Do you want me to put some baked potatoes in the Instapot? They'll be ready in half an hour or whatever." And she said, "Well, I guess, but I was just looking at the wedding pictures from our daughter's wedding recently." And I kind of just stopped and I'm like, what do pictures have to do with potatoes right now? And we kind of stood there and it felt like 10 minutes to me. She's telling me it was like 10 seconds. But I'm like, what has just happened? Did I miss something? Did I miss some cue? You know, did I miss an anniversary? All of those things was going through my head. And I'm like, I'm just like, I got these big eyes. And she kind of turned around. She realized what happened. She started laughing. She said, "I looked at those pictures and I did not like how I looked. And I just don't know if I should eat something this late at night because I'm afraid it's just going to make me fat." So we had a good laugh over that. But that disconnect that happened there very briefly, and she was kind enough to fill in, to connect the dots for me, because otherwise I was just completely lost as to what those things had to do with each other. So again, I would just say to any of the guys out there, if you're married or if you're in a relationship, ask questions, use words, and just try to communicate that I really do want to understand you. I do want to communicate with you in a way that is received well. And I want to understand what you're saying whenever you say certain things. So, it's kind of like, can we not play the games? Can we not play the game of let's see if he can understand me today? Because that's not really beneficial for anybody. And hopefully that will be received well. If it's not, there's some extra steps you can probably take. But most of the time, I think the ladies are going to say, "Yeah, I do want you to understand me so I can connect those dots for you."
I'm glad you said that because there was a thread on X which sort of went viral because there were so many women, and of course it's the internet, and it's not an accurate representation of really anything because it's just the people who decided to engage with this, and so
Yeah.
indexes over that. But there were so many women who were just saying, "No, I want him to figure it out." Like that is the part, and to which so many of the guys were going like, "Do you see the problem here?" Like there's a I think it does require it requires a mutual understanding. And one of the things that I really struggled with in my relationship and really in even outside of it is just the need to want to fix. It was in my
Oh,
relationship before, and then it was
yeah. Mhm.
also, I see it coming up in my, with my kids, and that, she or the kids come in with an issue and I go straight to solutions and I go straight
Yeah.
to fixing, and that's not actually what they wanted. They oftentimes wanted to be seen or heard or
Mhm.
felt, right? and
Yeah.
and the challenge, though, what I realized was that I was not grounded enough to sit in that emotion with her and not be triggered and not have a response and not get upset or angry or whatever it was. It was this
Yeah.
that my reaction to that emotion, which I didn't like feeling. I didn't like feeling this anger or sadness or whatever. So let me just jump to fixing. And when I started, really getting into somatic work and really trying to understand that part of it, things started to change. And now with my kids, they sort of have a big blow up. And I imagine it's a little bit different in a relationship, but they have this big blow up, and I'm, as opposed to reacting or even fixing, I'm sort of able to sit in there with them,
Mhm.
help them get through it, and then they end up finding their own sort of solution or end up coming to some of their own conclusions as opposed to the other way around.
Yes, guys, we are fixers. There's no doubt about it. And so it's so easy to just jump into that room of the house in your brain and just to say, "I am going to work to fix this issue," and just start throwing out all kinds of solutions. And so I think that that is a huge challenge for guys. Again, I think that communication is so important, and I do definitely recommend the direct approach anytime possible. Because sometimes I will just say to my wife, "Do you want me to throw out any solutions right now?" Because a couple things have come to my mind, and a lot of times she'll just say, like, "No, not right now." And I'll be like, "Okay." And that's hard. You got to kind of humble yourself a little bit and just say, "We're going to," as you kind of said it, we're just going to kind of sit in this emotion for just a little bit. And I don't exactly understand why we need to do that, but I'm going to do that because that's what you need right now. There's a great video, I'm sure that people can Google this and find it. It's called It's Not About the Nail. And it just kind of speaks to this. It's just a little skit and it's just
Just
hilarious.
take out the nail. You just take out the
Just
nail.
take out the nail and it would just fix everything like in 2 minutes. And I've got the ability to do it. But the wife just, as you said, she wants to be seen, she wants to be heard, to some level understood. And because I don't know, ladies feel emotions so much stronger than what we do, and they connect events to that. And so many times they won't remember that you just removed the nail and fixed the problem, but they will remember the 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour or however long it takes that you just sat with her in that tough moment and just kind of felt that pain with her.
Larry, this has been such a great conversation. I'm sad that it's flown by. We'll probably have to have you come back and do a round two. But I've got two questions for you. If people want to get more connected with you, with what you guys are doing, where's the best place for people to go and find out?
So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. Our website is sidebysidebusiness.com. So they could definitely reach out there, but that's probably the best and easiest way for people to get in contact with me.
We'll link all that up in the show notes for you guys, as always. And maybe there's some gals out there listening. I don't know, but always in there in the show notes for all the links and resources. And my last question for you, Larry, is in your opinion, what is the definition of modern masculinity?
Yeah, this definitely goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I really think the definition of modern masculinity is the same as ancient masculinity. I think it is being, yes, tough and rough and strong and all of those type of things. But I also think that it is being present and being at times with other guys, especially being vulnerable and open and honest. I think that a huge component of it is what we've been talking a lot about today, and that is being willing to building into other men and to encourage them, to challenge them, to hold them accountable, and just to grow together with them.